quick little reminder about the histogram. So the histogram is this little bar graph on the top here that represents all the colors and the amounts of those colors inside the image. So from this corner to this corner, all the way across, up and down, left and right, all around. All those colors are represented right here. White represents all the colors. Red represents red, blue represents blue, green represents green, yellow is a mixture of two of them, magenta is a mixture of two of them, cyan is a mixture of two of them, okay? We'll get into that later with the talk about the color wheel and transmitted light. So, starting off, let's work with our temperature first. Now, this image is just a little bit warm, but it's okay right now. But what we could go down just a few presses of our arrow keys. I'm just pressing the down arrow for that. And so in order to make that work, what I did is, notice when I hover over the word, and there's a slider attached to it, that there's this little scrubby finger. It's got a little side-to-side arrow. Well, if I click on the word, it'll highlight the numbers, and then I can use the arrows to go up and down. I'll show you on the tint here. So watch the numbers. I click, there it is, lights that up, and I can now go down to make it more green, or I'm going to hold down the shift key, or I can go up to make it more magenta. Alright, notice as I go more magenta, it gets a kind of an old-timey feel to it. So, yeah, depending on how you want to adjust things. I'm just going to leave it 0 because I think it looks fine there. One of the things that I notice here is that the white triangle is turned on, and that means I'm starting to lose information in my picture. And specifically because the one on the right here is turned on, that means I'm losing information in my highlights. And I can see that because it's represented by this tall spike on the edge of the graph climbing up this wall here. It's an imaginary wall. And that means that there's just too much light spilling over this visible point in the tonal range, and so we need to do something about that. Remember, this far edge here is 255, and this far edge here is 0. And you notice that on the shadow side, we have very little. In fact, the darkest shadows are almost in the middle of the graph, so we got a little bit of work to do there. So let's start with the exposure. I'm going to do the same thing before. I'm just going to click on the name, and then because the temperature or the tones are all to the right hand side, I'm going to go down. And so I'm just going to use the arrow key, down arrow first, and it's going to move it down in nice little chunks. Notice that triangle changes colors. It went from cyan to blue. Go a couple more clicks. And all the tones are starting to fall into nice places. And then right about there at -40 is a good exposure for this picture. If I need to do a little more fine tuning with that, I need to pull back the brightest highlights even more, I can use this recovery slider, and you can see the brightest highlights are moving only. But it's pulling it too far away from that edge, and that kills a little bit of my dynamic range, so I'm going to leave it in place. It doesn't need to move. At this point, none of my shadows are too dark to see into, but if they were, if the shadows were too deep and too heavy, I could use this fill light in order to lighten them up. As you watch, I'm just going to hold down the shift key as I press the up arrow, and notice that those shadows are getting lighter. Now they're lighter than some of the highlights, and we're starting to get this solarized effect, which is just it could be a creative effect if you wanted it. I'm just going to take it all the way back down to 0 because we don't need it. I'm going to click on the blacks now, and we can see right here on this far edge of the graph that the blacks need a lot of work, and they need a lot more presence. So I'm just going to click on that word. I'm going to start pressing up because the blacks will fill in really quick actually. So I don't want to go too fast. But what's nice is, watch right over here. Notice you're going to start seeing some fine-tuned detail in the webbing here that's going to start coming out in the shadows. So I'm going to keep going. Still just a black triangle up in that clipping display, so it doesn't matter to me. I'm going to keep running. Oh, there it is. now I'm starting to clip blue. So I'll go down one click, and right at about 37 on the blacks, that's where I start to get that nice deep rich shadow there. And notice everything's got some interesting form. I can see separation between things. There's this yellow web that's sticking out in front of this lighter white one. Heck, there was another spider in this scene. I didn't realize that. And so, but now the shadows have gotten a little bit deep. I can't see into, this old leaf and partial prey. And so I'm going to click on the fill light now. I'm just going to add back in about 6. Alright, and it's just till I can feel like this is a little more balanced. I just don't want it so heavy and so contrasty. Next is the brightness. Brightness affects my middle tones. So about a quarter of the way in from the highlights and a quarter of the way in from the shadows, this is what's going to be affected right in here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start off I'm going to hold down click on brightness so it's highlighted, shift key, and press up. Just kind of watch what happens. And go down, up, down, and I might do that a couple times just to see what's going on. I kind of like when it goes darker, but it's too dark, so I'm just going to go up to about 45, so midway between. There we go. 46 looks good to me, and that's good. Alright, my problem right now is I got too much contrast, so I'm not going to use contrast to create more contrast, but if I did, what would happen is as I drag this to the right, it's going to stretch all these middle tones into these outer quarters so that it can create more contrast. Where on the opposite side, if we went to the left and we start to kill contrast, it's going to pull those edges into those middle grays and kill contrast. Here's a little shortcut for you. If you double click on the slider itself, it'll reset it to where it started, so that might help you out. And what I might do is go down like 3 or 4 clicks just to equalize that. Alright, we're down to our last 3 adjustment sliders. The 3 that we have here, we have clarity, we have vibrance, and saturation. These all work with contrast. Clarity works with the contrast between colors. Vibrance works with the difference between very saturated color and less saturated color, and so it's going to work directly with the least saturated colors to either make them even more unsaturated or to saturate them even more to balance them out. So that's up to you to figure out which way that goes. And then saturation is either going to push color, make it more abundant, or make it less abundant. And so we could actually make these into black and white images if we take this down to 0 or to -100. Notice we go black and white. So I'm going to double click on that, reset it back to where it goes. Alright, so clarity, what I want to do, it's actually already in a pretty good spot. So watch what happens as I go down. It's going to make things in the background kind of fuzz out, but it's also going to make the web seem a little bit too soft. And so I'm going to come up, and I need that color contrast to make a difference here. I think right around 30 is the sweet spot. Okay, and what I was doing is I was watching these little fine hairs of the web in order to dial that in. Alright, now the vibrance. Now this one really is however you feel. We can go up with this to bolster up that green. Or we could take this down and let that web show more. And the fine little saturation of the yellow on the web in order to bring that out. And then I could take my saturation and just kick it a little bit to make sure that green stays somewhere, but that also makes sure that my web down here starts to pop out. And it's nice because now I'm starting to discover the web as we go around, and we're getting a little more sharpness to the image. Alright, good. That's the basic panel. If you guys can use this panel, you can understand what each of these settings is for, you can be very successful with this plugin. And this plugin, you can do 90% of your workload before you get into Photoshop, and then from there Photoshop is just for creative and new exploration.